So the evolution of science education. So first, we will dive into the historical context. So early science education, focusing on the 1900s to the 1940s, focused on traditional science education. So it was more of an emphasis on rote memorization. So science instruction was largely focused on facts, definitions, and passive learning. It was teacher-centered instruction, lectures, and textbook-based learnings were the primary methods of instruction. There's limited hands-on learning and exclusionary practices. Women and minorities had limited access to science education due to segregation and societal biases. So next, diving into the mid 20th century, the 1950s to the 1970s. Science education progressed and specialized subjects began to emerge, such as biology, chemistry, and physics. This specialization allowed for focused study, but also reinforced the separation of disciplines. During this time, it also was the rise of inquiry-based science education. So that was around the time that Sputnik and the space race was happening. The National Defense Education Act was passed, which increased funding for science and mathematics education, encouraging problem solving and innovation. We did shift more into an inquiry-based learning. So it was inspired by educational psychiatrists like Hyatt and Berner. Science education moved towards student-centered learning and hands-on activities. And there was also a curriculum reform happening during this time. So programs like the Biological Sciences Curriculum and Physical Science Study Committee introduced a more experimental approach to learning. So there were some deficiencies that were caused by these separations that were happening. We were having this increase in learnings and approaches, but the separation of scientific disciplines led to a fragmented knowledge. It made it difficult for students to apply concepts in real world scenarios. And this challenge prompted educators to reconsider the effectiveness of isolated teaching methods and seek integrative alternatives, which then led to the inquiry-based learning and some of the reforms. So next, there was a major shift in the 20th century of science education. So it became more focused on a integrated curriculum. So there was benefits of an integrated curriculum and enhanced learner engagement by connecting various scientific disciplines, making learning relevant and meaningful. And students developed critical knowledge and thinking skills as they apply knowledge across contexts, and it prepared them for the complexities of real world challenges. And this was also the time of the constructivist learning and technological advances, so the 1980s to the 1990s. So this was the idea that students were able to construct their own knowledge based on prior experiences, and it became central to science education. There was an increase in laboratory-based learnings. Schools emphasized real world problem solving through guided experiments. And during this time, there was also um, an approach on how to handle gender and racial equity initiatives. So efforts to address these disparities in STEM education grew with targeted programs to support women and underrepresented minorities in these spaces. And this was also the beginning of technology integrating into science-based learnings. So the development of computers and interactive media began to be used in classrooms. And so that was the technology. So that takes us to the technology enhanced science education, which was the early 21st century, 2000s to the 2010s. During this time, there was an advancement in digital learning and an emphasis on collaborative learning. The early 20th century started the rise of STEM and STEAM movement and the growth of culturally responsive teaching. So, virtual lab simulations and online resources became more common in science education, and students were encouraged to work in teams, engaging in peer discussions and interdisciplinary projects. And as mentioned, there was a national focus on increasing student participation in these sectors of science, technology, education, and mathematics, which now has later, which is uh, in later within the 21st century has turned into STEAM to include the arts. And the growth of culturally responsive teaching, there's an acknowledgement of diverse student backgrounds led to more inclusive curricula that reflected contributions from scientists from all backgrounds. And also, science encouraged open-ended questioning, critical thinking, and student-driven exploration, which was a far difference from where we started, where it was more focused on memorization and just learning rather than the evolution and the learning, but questioning and also diving deeper. So now we can discuss the current and the future directions, 2020 and beyond. So technology's role in education, as we know, technology is ever evolving. It's transforming science education by facilitating interactive learning environments. Tools like simulation and virtual labs, virtual learning, and online learning were also more widely adopted, specifically during COVID. All schools were forced to shut down because students needed to be 6 feet apart. So that introduced virtual learning to many more spaces. But also, even with technology evolving, there are disparities that certain communities face, whether it's the accessibility to technology, the accessibility to good Wi-Fi, like rural areas. So this is ever shaping and continuously needing an improvement. And so the current focus, there has been a focus on sustainability and real world applications. Curriculum has been able to shift to address climate change, renewable energy, and environmental science. There also has been an increase in use of AI in the world. So it has been implemented into the educational system. So what's next? What do we see holding in the future? I personally am extremely interested in climate change and environmental science. We only have one world, and I think that it has kind of been centered as like a specialized learning, like not maybe such a primary focus for young people to learn about climate change and environmental science, but it's definitely something that needs to be dived in deeper because we have to learn to take care of our world and all the parts of it. So if it becomes a part of everyday knowledge and practice within our educational system, maybe more students will be interested in it and try to go down that path, which will lead to more discovery, more inquiry, and questioning that can hopefully lead us to solutions. And of course, I think that the future of science education is that it will just be more personalized because of all the technological advances. There's AI-driven educational platforms that tailor science instruction to the individual student's needs. They're able to have the blended and hybrid learning models. Um, and it's also allowing for global collaboration and digital accessibility. So what we may be learning here in the US might be vastly different than what other countries are learning or implementing within their spaces, but we are still able to learn from them. And I think that this will benefit the world overall, but also facing, are students truly learning, or are they too heavily dependent on AI? Um, because AI has, for some spaces, become a teaching assistant, but we still need to acknowledge lived experiences and the interactions of science and lived experiences. So we have to be careful of the balance of utilizing technology within these spaces. But again, it does offer the flexibility for learning pathways, and they will have access to non-traditional science education paths, and it will create lifelong learning and continuous education are the other points of the future. So this was the outline of the evolution of science education and the 2 points of direction where I think we're going to head. Thank you.